Penguin Random House Audio presents The Tie That Binds by Kent Haruf. Read for you by Danny Campbell. Chapter 1. Edith Goodnough isn't in the country anymore. She's in town now, in the hospital. Lying there in that white bed with a needle stuck in the back of one hand, and a man standing guard in the hallway outside her room. She'll be 80 years old this week. A clean, beautiful, white-haired woman who never in her life weighed as much as 115 pounds, and she has weighed a lot less than that since New Year's Eve. Still, the sheriff and the lawyers expect her to get well enough for them to sit her up in a wheelchair and then drive her across town to the courthouse to begin the trial. When that happens, if that happens, I don't know that they will go so far as to put handcuffs on her. Bud Seeley, the sheriff, has turned out to be a son of a bitch, all right. But I still can't see him putting handcuffs on a woman like Edith Goodnough. On the other hand, I don't suppose Bud Seeley ever intended to become a son of a bitch at all. As late as 9 days ago, he was sitting on a bar stool at the lunch counter in the Holt Cafe. It was Friday afternoon. It was about 2:30, that slack time that comes every day for him when he's got all his paperwork filled out, when there isn't a thing more for him to do, except wait for the high school kids to get out of school so they can begin to race up and down Main Street, or drive out onto US 34 and cut cookies on the blacktop. So Bud had time. He was relaxing. Already he had eaten his butterscotch pie, and Betty had cleared his plate. Now, while he waited for a second cup of black coffee to cool, he was turned around on the bar stool so as to front the men who sat opposite him in the booths. The men had come in earlier in their town pants and adjustable caps. 2 or 3 of them had slapped them on the back like they do, and they had all taken their places on the other stools or in the nearby booths so they could hear the talk and keep current. Most of the talk that afternoon was Bud's. He was telling them a story. I believe most of the men had heard this particular story at least twice before, though I doubt that any one of them would have thought to stop him from telling it again, since the one thing they all had too much of was just that, time. 2 or 3 had already retired from the work they had never gotten around to beginning. At any rate, the story Bud was telling that afternoon had to do with how there was this guy at the National Western Stock Show who was walking around in public with a piece of pink thread tied to himself. Like what it was tied to was one of the agricultural exhibits in the pavilion hallways. He was sort of displaying himself to folks. That is, until the police collared him and took him to jail for indecent exposure and creating a nuisance. They booked him. A few weeks later, when they stood him up in front of a judge, an old man with wire glasses and no hair to speak of, the judge says to him, "Son, I'm going to ask you just one question, and I want an answer. Son, are you crazy?" And the guy with the pink thread says, "No, sir, I don't believe so." And the judge says, "Well then, are you just half crazy?" And the guy says. But Bud never got to say this time what the guy says, because just then someone walked into the Holt Cafe that neither Bud nor any of the other men knew. He asked which one of them was the sheriff. One of the boys pointed to Bud. It turned out this new man was a newspaper reporter from Denver. He had just driven into town. At the police station, they had told him that he might discover the sheriff at the Holt Cafe, and he did. So I dated about then, a little after 2:30 on a Friday afternoon in April, that Bud Seeley started seriously to become a son of a bitch. Because in a few minutes, Bud and this Denver man went out to the town's cop car. They drove off up Main Street, and I don't guess they had driven long or far before Bud gave him the 50-pound bag of chicken feed that had been knifed open and laid in easy access for the 6 or 7 chickens, laid just inside the chicken coop, where it wouldn't get wet or snowed on. That was not enough, however. That did not satisfy him. The man from Denver wanted more than just chicken feed. So Bud turned off onto one of the residential streets and drove a block or two under the budding elm trees risen along the curb, and then on Birch Street or Cedar. He gave him the dog, too. Told him how the old milky-eyed dog, which had never been tied up before, had nevertheless been tied up that particular December afternoon 3.5 months ago, and again within easy reach of several days' food and water. But that still was not enough. Chicken feed and an old dog must have only whet the Denver man's appetite. Besides, I suppose he was beginning to crowd Bud now, shove him hard for more. Then, too, maybe by this time, Bud was beginning to see something in it for himself. Perhaps Bud imagined that having his name appear on the front page of a Denver newspaper would somehow ensure his 20-year-old investment at the local county polls, as if it would permanently close an insurance policy with us that would make us want to go on marking that X beside his name come the first Tuesday in November. Because with his name featured prominent in the big city papers, and on the front page no less, we'd be proud of him, take pride in one of our own's managing such a thing. And then he wouldn't ever have to do any more storytelling in the Holt Cafe in order to collect from us. All he would have to do would be to enter his name on the proper election papers at the appointed time and see to it that it was spelled right, and then, why, hell, just go on paying his wife's doctor bills and sending those tuition payments to the State University in Boulder, where it looked like his kid was never going to amount to a goddamn or even to graduate. But I can't say for sure that's how Bud was thinking. What I've suggested is based only on what I know about him after these 50 years of seeing and talking to him about once every week. No. All I know for sure is that his cop car was out in the country a little later that same afternoon, and he and the Denver man were still in it, still talking, still licking up to one another like they were a couple of dogs discussing the fresh joys of a bitch in heat. Only they were not discussing copulation, nor love and the weather, nor even the price of fat hogs at the sale barn in Brush. It was more than that. I believe it was a lot more, because it was then and there, with corn stubble on one side and green wheat on the other, that Bud Seeley emptied himself. He gave him Edith Goodnough. He told him how in December Edith had sat there quiet, rocking herself and waiting, while over there across the room from her, Lyman, her brother, had lain on his cot asleep, snoring against the wall. Bud didn't have to tell that. There was enough without any of that. It's just a good thing the son of a bitch didn't know about Lyman's travel papers and pumpkin pie, because if he had, he'd have thrown them in, too. Sure as hell. Myself, the next afternoon when he came to me, I didn't give him a thing. This was 8 days ago, Saturday. First I hear the tires on the gravel grind, then the car door. It's too early in the afternoon for it to be Mavis and Rena Pickett returning from town, so I look up from the squeeze chute where I'm doctoring cows, and at the time, when I see the Denver plates, I still think it must be one of these state farm agents come out to talk fertilizer. Even when I see he's wearing a tie and yellow pants, I think it is, because nowadays some of your young farm agents are starting to dress like that, like they think at any minute they're going to be called on to play ping-pong. Anyway, here he comes, walking over towards me away from his car. He gains the corral, finds the gate, fiddles with the bar latch, but then it looks as if he can't figure out how to work it, because he starts climbing. It doesn't do the hinges a lot of good.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?